My name is David Goldblatt. I'm a South African. I've always lived in South Africa. I was born there. And this is my first public exhibition, major exhibition in France. I had one exhibition in a commercial gallery in Paris in 2004, but this is my first major public exhibition. It was curated by Martinez, the British photographer. When I was much younger, when I first started taking photographs, I wanted to tell the world about what was happening in South Africa, because at that time the magazines in the world and the press were not very interested in us. And it seemed to me that terrible things were beginning to happen in South Africa, and I needed to tell the world about this. But quite soon I realized that this was not what I was best able to do. I'm not a good photographer of events. I'm a coward. I run away from violence. I don't like violence and confrontation. And I am not interested in events as such, as a photographer. As a citizen of the country, yes, of course I am. But as a photographer, I'm interested in the causes of events, what attitudes lead to events. And so, if you're asking me what function did I think my photographs might perform, I find that a very difficult question to answer, because I don't think that I ever influenced anybody to do anything or not to do anything, because I don't regard myself as a missionary. I didn't regard the camera as a weapon in the liberation struggle, as some of my colleagues in South Africa did. It was a dialogue, my photography, between myself and whatever I photographed and my compatriots, my fellow South Africans. I realized roughly in about 1968 that I wasn't very interested in talking to people outside South Africa, because the situation was too complicated, and the things that I was interested in photographing were too oblique, too ingrown, too involuted for people who were not born in the country to understand. I found when I tried to show these photographs outside South Africa, it was like trying to explain jokes. And of course, once you explain a joke, it's no longer a joke, it's no longer funny. During the years of apartheid, I was concerned with trying with exploring why people valued this peculiar and evil system, and how they expressed those values in their homes, in themselves, in their bodies, and in the things that they built. Well, in the very early work, there is photography that I did of Afrikaner people in South Africa. These are the people who were the supporters of the apartheid government. And I became very interested in trying to understand better who these people were and what their values are and so on. And then I photographed the dying gold mines of South Africa. I was born and grew up in a town that is surrounded by gold mines. And eventually I worked with the writer Nadine Gordimer on that particular essay. And then through my years of photography, I have worked on essays. I have very seldom worked in single pictures. Almost everything that I've done in my personal work has been around a group of photographs relating to a certain subject that became of interest to me. So at some stage I became interested in photographing people's bodies. I had been doing a lot of portraits in Soweto and in Johannesburg of black people and white people. And while I was doing them, I became very interested in their bodies. I would see a girl's hands and her arm and maybe the breast or hip or whatever it was. And so then I decided just to look at that and see what I would do, what came out. Would it be of any interest? And for about 6 months, that's all I did. I became obsessed by people's bodies. I would go to people and sitting in a park or in a public place and say, do you mind if I photograph your hands, or something like that. And then I wanted to look at my own society, middle-class white society. I grew up in a middle-class white community called Randfontein. And I suppose I could have gone back there, but I didn't want to do that because it would have been too painful and also very difficult. But I went to another town where there was a similar community, Boksburg. And I spent about 6 months there in 1979 and 1980, just photographing life in this white community. And my reason, or my interest in this, was based on a question. How is it possible to be law-abiding, normal, decent in society and in a system that is fundamentally evil? This was my question to myself, really. I couldn't answer it. There's no answer, because those people that I photographed in Boksburg were ordinary people, and you will find similar people in Hull, you will find them in Paris, you will find them in New York, in Chicago, in Gothenburg, in Sweden. Wherever you go in the world, you will find people like this. But here are people who were living and collaborating with a system that was fundamentally evil. So I tried in those photographs to withdraw myself. I didn't want to be present in the pictures. I wanted these pictures to be completely a reflection of life in that place at that time. So you never see me, the photographer, in those pictures. They're always people interacting with each other. And then I did the photographs that you have mentioned of the people riding the buses. Those were very... I mean, that didn't take much time in terms of the photographs. I made a few trips on the buses. And those were perhaps the most moving times that I've ever had, traveling on those buses with those people, because some of them traveled for up to 8 hours a day just to go to work and come home. The grain is very strong because there was no light. And then I spent 10 years photographing structures in South Africa, and another 5 years doing research and writing about those structures. So 15 years altogether on the one project. As far as I know, I don't know of any other work in photography anywhere in which people have looked at structures as expressions of value. They've looked at structures as architecture, as art, as expressions of culture, but not as expressions of value. Why is a church built in a certain way? Now, in Europe, you have magnificent churches. My exhibition here is in a beautiful old church, dating perhaps from the, I don't know, the 16th century, 17th century. If I were to ask somebody here in Hull, why is that church built in that particular way? What does it express? They wouldn't be able to tell me. And the fundamental reason, in my opinion, is that in Europe you have centuries of art and of culture, layer upon layer upon layer, and you have forgotten already what lies at the bottom of the layer. In South Africa, that's not the case. It's still a very young society, and we have built our structures to express ourselves in a very naked way. Our churches are, in my opinion, an amazing expression of values. The Afrikaners were the most powerful, energetic group of whites in the country. They pioneered the drive into the interior. They fought against the black people who occupied those places and conquered them, and then built their churches in those places and expressed their conquest in those churches. And I could draw a graph of the political fortunes of that folk, of that people, and correlate it with the architecture of their churches. In the 19th century, the latter part of the 19th century, their churches were beautiful, like cathedrals, like European cathedrals. They were designed by European architects, because in South Africa there were no trained architects. So they were based on Dutch, German and French sacred architecture. But they were also expressions of the newfound strength and freedom of this folk. They were celebratory. They celebrated the rising strength of this people. Then came the Anglo-Boer War, when the Boers, these Afrikaners, went to war with Britain. And Britain eventually conquered them, broke their spirit, broke the economy, burnt their farms, put their women and children into concentration camps. Those were the first concentration camps. And the churches that they built after that, for a while, were very much the same. They were based still on those early churches, but much quieter. And then in the 1930s, a political movement grew among the Afrikaners to express Afrikaner nationalism, which was a rising force. And this rising force was then expressed in a number of very potent folk movements. I'm not going to go into that, but the church architecture then changed fundamentally. They built, at the beginning of the Second World War, just two churches were built at the beginning of the Second World War by one man, an architect, and they changed the whole picture of Dutch Reformed Church architecture, Afrikaner Protestant architecture, because he broke away completely from the European model. He built a modernist structure to express the modern Afrikaner and the unity of this Afrikaner folk that was now taking place, this new political strength. And after the war, after the Second World War, those churches just took off like fireworks. They became triumphal because they expressed the strength of apartheid. They were triangulated with huge phallic spires, great big windows, because the liturgy of the church was based on the principle that die woord moet uitgaan. The word of God must go out. You must preach the word of God. So the word of God was preached by the preacher. He stood in the apex of the church. It was like a megaphone. The church was like a megaphone. And in front of him were his congregation, and then there were these big windows so that his word could go out to the world. And the word that he preached was the word of apartheid. And then came the 1970s and the 1980s, when the Afrikaner folk believed that they were being attacked